Gender balance at the top. I guess that some of you, when you saw it was the topic of one of the talks, you thought, not again. I mean, we're here in Switzerland in 2023, and we still have to discuss gender balance, gender equality. What happened? I mean, first of all, gender equality is something, of course, that should be just an issue of justice, of fairness. It should be normal that half of the population be represented in decision-making roles. But on top of that, it's been years, and even now decades, since studies have started demonstrating that teams with a good gender balance, teams with a mixture of men and women in leadership roles, where decisions are made, when the future of a company or of the world is decided, those teams are actually much better. They make organizations more innovative, more profitable, and even more resistant in times of crisis. It was demonstrated in the 2008 financial crisis, and it was still demonstrated in the recent COVID crisis. Companies with a better gender balance resisted better. They have better results. So you would think, okay, now that we have all those studies that have been made and replicated by top research institutes, by universities, even by banks, I mean, everywhere in the world where decisions have to be taken, there is a good balance, right? Oops. This is COP27. This is actually what a lot of decision-making organizations or spheres still look like. A few women here and there, so that there are not only dark suits, but a huge majority of men. In Switzerland, on the Swiss market index, where companies are listed on the stock exchange, there is not one single female who is a CEO, not one. And generally speaking, in Swiss large companies, it's about 15% of women in the C-suite, 15%, and 85% of men. Okay, this doesn't really make sense, right? I mean, when it's been demonstrated, it brings a lot to have gender balance. Why would it be that nobody takes it, that nothing goes forward? Well, yes, it's complicated. Yes, of course, you do not have one magic wand that can change it. You do not have one single measure that can make it better. It's a complicated issue. First of all, because it dates back a long time. And I can tell you, sometimes I give talks in front of teenagers in schools, and when we explain that gender inequality is supposed to date back to Neolithics, the teenagers are like, what can we do, you know? Let's even stop wanting to tackle it. So yes, we are influenced by a lot of cultural and social norms that are deeply anchored in our societies and that basically influence every single sphere. Politics, law, education, marketing, advertising, and of course the corporate world. And the corporate world is not separate from the rest of the society. Everything is intertwined. You do not have a professional life which is completely separate from your private life. So everywhere, in every sphere of the society and in every sphere of our lives, we have those elements of gender inequality that are there because it's a system. It's a system we have inherited, and it's a system that self-reproduces. That's bad news. But where it's good news is that things can actually be done. And when you realize that this system produces inequality and you want to mend it, it means that every sphere has a responsibility, and the corporate world as well. Okay, so what can we do? Well, the first thing, the most important thing, is to challenge biases. I'm sure you're all aware that we have a rapid way of working in our brain that makes associations between what we go through and past memories, past experiences, and all the representations that we have been taught about or that we have been exposed to, whether it's in reality or in films, in series, in advertising, everywhere in the society. And when it comes to gender, and we have to discuss biases or cliches or stereotypes, well, it feels that the world is separate into two different realities, as if there were two different planets. Some authors even made a lot of money explaining that men and women come from different planets. You know this is not true, right? You know that there is no gene of soccer or of ballet, that there is no gene of wanting to drive a sports car or doing laundry, that there is no gene of wanting to become an engineer or wanting to become a nurse. And yet, those representations still very much structure our reality, influence our choices, and influence our future, our dreams, the models we have, what we can project ourselves into. And when it comes to the corporate world, where we have a problem, is that those biases, even though we more or less know that they do not stand, they still influence a lot the way women are perceived at work. And you have three of them, if we try to classify it. Number one is the association of women to family. You would think that if you hire a woman, or if you consider her for a big project, or if you think of her for a promotion, is it really a good idea? She may be pregnant next year. Or maybe she already has children, and your biases make you think that she will put family first. And you would not think that of her male colleague. This is interesting, right? Because parents actually make children together, right? But you would not think that a potential father or a father of young children would be less available or less committed to his career, or that you would not consider him for a promotion because, you know, he will be more often absent when the child is sick. But you would do that if it's a woman. So the association of women to family is the first bias we have to deal with. And it impairs women's careers still today. And in Switzerland, by the way, there's 1.5 child per woman in a lifetime. So it's not such a huge risk, but it actually penalizes all women in the workplace. The second bias, and this is becoming a little more serious, is about competence. You would think this is ridiculous, you know. No one makes differences between men and women about competence. Well, it is not what studies show. Studies show that in job interviews, women get more technical questions. As if, by default, a man was considered competent. You didn't need to check, really. And a woman needed to prove it. And this changes the game, I'm telling you. So studies demonstrate that. And our field experience every day in our executive search job also shows it. We do have very often directors or managers telling us, oh yes, I'd be very happy to hire a woman if she's competent. I never, ever heard this sentence in the masculine form, as if, again, a man was competent by default. And it's also something the female executives we work with tell us, that they feel they need to work twice as hard. They need to prove twice as much as their male colleagues to be recognized, to be legitimate. And when it comes to failure, of course, there's no room for that. Because again, something we've heard several times is, oh yes, once we chose a woman to lead this huge department and it did not work very well. So now we're kind of hesitant. The question we ask, has it ever happened that it went well with a man at the head of the department? Oh yes, constantly. So maybe they have stopped hiring men just in case, or what is the story exactly? And of course not, because you have this impression also that you have a lot of variety among the men you can choose from, whereas the very big trap women have to deal with is the impression that it's a woman and she represents all of them. So those examples, just to tell you that this bias against which we need to fight, that women's or men's competencies should not be based, of course, on their gender, but on what they can do, is still real in the corporate world. And it gets worse. In Harvard, you may have heard that they gave a case study to students about the story of a venture capitalist. Have you heard already about this case study? It's Howard versus Heidi. What it means is it was exactly the same story of a successful venture capitalist who invests in startups. And to some students, they gave the case study, the venture capitalist was called Howard. And to some other students, they gave exactly the same story, and the venture capitalist was called Heidi. So nothing was different except the first name and the gender. And the students were asked 3 questions. Do you think the entrepreneur is successful? Is competent? Do you like him or her? Would you like to work with this person? And when the entrepreneur was called Howard, the student said, oh, wow, such an amazing guy. He's so competent. I would absolutely love to work for him because he seems just like such a great guy. And when the entrepreneur was called Heidi, the students also said, oh, wow, she's so competent. It's amazing what she has achieved. But she doesn't seem very nice. And I would not really like to work with someone like that. And so it seems that when women stick with the feminine stereotypes of being kind, soft, gentle, sympathetic, not too assertive, they're liked, but their competence can be questioned. Whereas when women are more assertive and display traits that you would probably expect more often from a man, they're recognized as competent, but they're disliked. And this is where the corporate world is not really neutral and doesn't give the same opportunities. Finally, the third bias we have to deal with is the association of women to their bodies, to their physical appearance. That also often is a challenge for women to feel comfortable or safe or included in the workplace. And this is a major challenge if you want to have an inclusive and equal and balanced workplace. You need to wonder whether everyone feels safe and okay and respected. And if there is an inappropriate comment or a sexist joke or an assault, then of course people do not feel safe. So this is also the company's responsibility and the corporate world's responsibility. It's not nice, you do not want to go there, but it is the responsibility to address this question. Because otherwise, what you get is this. This is what we call a leaky pipeline, which means that at the beginning of the career, you do have a balance, because today boys and girls study, and in Switzerland the figures is even that women represent a little more than half of the skilled workforce. So they enter their career, it's half-half. Not in every sector, obviously, but generally speaking, it's equal. And along the way, we lose the women. And this is not good news, because it means we lose talent, we lose potential, we lose skilled individuals. And this is actually very costly to companies. Companies always have the feeling that doing something to favor gender equality is going to be costly, but actually not doing anything to make sure the workplace is inclusive and values people for their competence and not for a particular category they belong to, is very costly. It's a waste of talent. So if you think this is not okay, you may want to challenge how you select people, on which basis, on which criterion. How do you identify leadership, for example? Because people always hide with this issue of competence, behind this issue of competence. They would say, oh, I never look at the gender, the only thing that is important to me is competence. But what is competence? Who defines it? What is the referential you use? What are the criteria? And who assesses it? So, of course, when you're looking for a software engineer or for a lawyer, it's easy because you have degrees, you have experience, it's very technical. You can assess this. But when you're looking for a strategic mind, someone who has a vision, someone who has leadership, who can lead others, who can make choices, who has strong interpersonal skills, what is the referential? And this is where I'd like to say that the real debate that lies under this issue of gender balance or gender equality, the real debate is about challenging what we mean by being a leader and the qualities that we value to select the people we want to see at the top in the decision-making roles. And this is where we need to bring empathy and care and humanity, probably more than the traditional model we have inherited, which valued a lot of ego, authority, power, and which also implied kind of stepping on others in order to reach the top. We know this doesn't work. We know this doesn't provide good leaders. So we need to embrace the rest that can help us build a new model. And we need models. And that is why I wanted to conclude this talk with this image of Jacinda Ardern, who's been New Zealand's Prime Minister for the past 5 years. It's not because she's a woman, because this new leadership that will be needed for the future is not a leadership that can be incarnated only by women. It's a human leadership, but that brings in some values that had been neglected in the past. And hopefully, with such a new model, we can build a better world. Thank you very much.